Why China will one day dominate the world.
China is determined to become the world's next superpower.
And will soon become the superpower of planet Earth.
China's the next superpower.
No, China won't lead the world. Bold claim, I know. I mean, I'm basically saying that everyone else is wrong. But I think you might agree with me after I break it down. I get it. It looks impressive. Think about this though. What if the economic development, the shiny new buildings, the megacity projects, the high-speed rails, the poverty alleviation, what if it wasn't real? Hear me out. Physically, yeah, I get it. These things are real. But the actual necessity and reality of them is not as real as you might think. It's quite simple, actually. In order to lead the world, you cannot close yourself off. You need to be an influence. You see, when communist China took over in 1949, it wasn't that long ago, was it? After allowing the nationalist Kuomintang party to suffer the brunt of the war against Japan and hiding out until a power vacuum could be taken advantage of, that's literally what Chairman Mao did. It was obsessed with the Soviet Union. You see, believe it or not, communism used to be the cool kid on the block back then. You previously had your fascists in Nazi Germany and Italy, and your colonial powers like in the UK, and you had your rebels out there like the US, and you had the Soviet bloc, which at that time looked like it could be the new thing. Chairman Mao, he was utterly obsessed with competing with and impressing the Soviet Union, with things like grain and steel quotas. I mean, literally people were melting down their pots and pans in their backyard and homemade furnaces just to keep those quotas up. People were lying about grain production so they didn't get punished. It ended up Chairman Mao actually exporting a lot of that grain so people starved to death. This obsession with competing and saving face led to the very policies that starved tens of millions of people in the modern age. We're not talking about some flood that wiped out 50,000 people in the 1400s or something. We're talking about when your parents or your grandparents were alive. 50-something million Chinese people were trading their babies, eating grass, and ultimately dying of starvation because the leader of China was so obsessed with impressing the Soviet Union that he let his people starve. This guy is on the money, by the way, today. He's considered a hero. Go figure. Unfortunately, the way that China operated back then hasn't really changed much. Yes, capitalism happened in 1979, and finally, Chinese people were allowed to make money. But listen, this Chinese miracle you keep hearing about, China's the next big thing, well, it simply can't be, because it didn't do what it was supposed to do. And that is continue growing, liberalizing, and offering natural and political freedoms to its populace. It didn't do those things. When you allow an authoritarian dictatorship to become a headstrong, and I mean literally you only have one head making the decisions in China, you can quickly undo all that has been good. You can see this obsession with face and impressing the outside world with things like the fact that you can take a high-speed rail from one end of the country to the other in China, but you can't drink the water without getting horrendously ill. You can go marvel at the world's largest dam, but you'll get better medical treatment in Laos. You can go to a restaurant in a 5-star hotel, but it doesn't guarantee that you're not going to get food poisoning. You can buy $1 million apartment, but you can't flush the toilet paper down the toilet because it will clog the entire building's pipe system. You can go buy a supercar, but you can't own your own land. And here's the deal. In 2021, with Xi Jinping at the helm, the mistakes are coming left and right. And mark my words, the majority of the advantages that people like to attribute to authoritarian powers are unraveling at an alarming speed. And the problems that China is currently dealing with would never allow them to lead the world. The problem is, Xi Jinping, the dictator of China, he doesn't want to acknowledge what actually made China begin to rise out of poverty and made China a respected world power. You know what that thing was? It was the fact that Chinese people were allowed to make money. Go figure. You let people trade, invest, and start companies and improve their lives, especially with a skilled populace like China, and things go well. Also, remember when China wasn't going all in on communism? You know, the great period of opening up. That's closed now. Not just for foreign companies, which are leaving left and right, but also for domestic ones. Instead of the central government acting on its socialist promises, it's forcing companies to pay into social welfare programs. Capitalist influence is being destroyed, and it's not for the altruistic reasons you might think. It's to placate and calm the increasingly angry farmers and low-income people. And it's straight out of a Chairman Mao playbook. The money doesn't come from the disturbingly decadent, wealthy CCP communist officials or the taxes that they're supposed to collect. It's from private people's money. In China's richest province, Zhejiang, Chairman Xi Jinping just purged one of his most powerful insider allies. And China plans to ban all Chinese companies from listing on the US stock exchange. Ultimate control is what it desires. The Chinese government just made it illegal to talk negatively about the economy on the internet, and it's scrubbing any comments made about economic slowdown. Imagine being a stockbroker where you only have access to an intranet, not the internet, where you only have information to go off of that's actually just lies from the central government. Also, Xi Jinping just destroyed private education, banned all foreign textbooks, and introduced his own doctrine, Xi Jinping thought for the new era, into all classrooms in an effort to nationalize the education system and indoctrinate from a young age. Chinese people have grown up in an authoritarian system, but even parents now are getting very worried at what's happening around them. I really hate the idea of forcing my children to study this ideology, said a mother in Jiangsu who didn't want to be identified. But I can't voice my concern in front of my son. This is disgusting, said a father in Henan province. I hope she forgets, in reference to his daughter, I hope she forgets about everything after she is done with the exam. You see, for Chinese people, this is not the China that they signed up for 10 or 15 years ago. Things were supposed to get better. Also, China currently faces a massive demographic crisis, meaning that all of the kids born into the one-child policy era days now have to take care of their parents and grandparents. So they simply cannot afford to have children of their own. The Chinese government, they had a quick fix, and they said, hey, now you can have 2 kids instead of 1, which quickly became, now you can have 3 kids instead of 2, to where now they say, have as many kids as you want. And guess what? I'm going to predict this. Mark my words, they're going to punish people in the future for not having kids. The Chinese government's policies are usually based in overreaction to a problem that should have been dealt with a long time ago. Living in China, you can see this very thing. Oftentimes, when something is banned, it's because a problem has festered and boiled over for far too long, so that drastic and draconian measures are put into place overnight. China is currently not renewing passports for its own citizens to leave, under the guise of COVID prevention. Alarmingly similar to Chairman Mao's policies at the height of the Cultural Revolution. Speaking of dictator worship, countries that replace ordinary ground tiles where their leaders stood with gold ones are not world leader material. By the way, this is not some historical place where Chairman Mao stood. We're talking about the current dictator of China. I could list off problems all day because inherently there are massive issues with a country that has no checks and balances. A dictator for life who removes term limits and only surrounds himself with yes men who cannot critique or adjust his maniacal policies shuts the populace off from the rest of the world by creating a social credit system that rates what citizens do and then blocks them from accessing the internet outside of Chinese websites, all while mandating that his thoughts become doctrine for the entire country. Yeah, inherently there's some issues there. But the simplest reason that China won't rule the world is this. no one likes China. Let me clarify. I love China. I spent 10 years of my life there. Many people love and appreciate Chinese culture and food and the people. But unfortunately, China is ruled by a one-party state, and that one-party state claims to own and represent the entire country. Not all the good things that make China what it is. And guess what? That's absolutely obliterating China's international image. I know this is a bitter pill to swallow and is very unfair to the people of China, but in order to rule the world, you have to be an influence, not just a bully. Take the USA for example. There's a reason that the USA has so much influence in the world. You see, post-World War II, most of the developed world was absolutely destroyed, in ruins, and getting past this whole empire phase. Think of the UK. At this time, the USA offered the world a deal. They said, as long as it's not the Soviet Union, you can trade with whoever you want. You won't even need to use your own navy to protect your goods because we will do it for you. This new order around the world will be ours, America's, and it's up to you if you want to be part of that or not. Most places in the world took advantage and agreed to the deal. And for the first time in history, countries without massive natural resources or military power could actually grow their economies. And the world, by and large, flourished. The USA let the world do what they want to do, and if anyone threatened that trade, they would step in and stop whatever nonsense was happening. Yes, America spread its pop culture and ideals of freedom and democracy to many places abroad, but the biggest American influence was just participating in this system of trade, where the USA will back you up if you play nicely. Look at Europe. They unified, and they used less money on their militaries, while Japan was able to turn itself into an economic powerhouse and rebuild itself away from fascism. Germany too. Believe it or not, and I'm deeply sorry to the people that won't be able to handle this. You might want to bite something right now, but it's the truth. The USA actually supported decolonization as long as it wasn't replaced with communism. Every country in the world was supposed to have a shot at success, the American dream style. And now, in 2021, whether you're in Poland or Vietnam or Botswana or Colombia, you benefit from the American-led order. That's the simple truth. You benefit from your exports and imports being reliably delivered on time from a global marketplace. You benefit from not having a government in a military arms race just to keep its borders secure with its neighbors. You benefit from the USA being a country that would rather the world be at status quo and remain relatively open, rather than a country that is a leech, like the despotic ethno-state vampire that China has become. Remember back in 2015 when China said it wouldn't militarize the South China Sea? Well, guess what? Now China's the kind of country that demands all vessels to register when traveling through international waters that it now declares its own territory. You see what happens when you let a country like this control the water? You can read all the fear-mongering media you want. Yes, I absolutely agree that China can influence our country's education and trade and free speech, and that's terrible and alarming, and we need to do something about it. But China has no ambition to replace the USA in leading the world. It's impossible. What they want to do is leech off the benefits of free trade and export-oriented growth that is only possible when America is keeping the seas open. A country cannot be trusted to maintain, much less defend, a free rules-based order while breaking the same rules. Plus, they just can't. They lack a blue water navy to actually patrol the oceans of the world, and no one really trusts anything that China says. Their guarantees and their contracts aren't worth the paper that they're printed on, and anyone that's dealt with China knows this. Aside from the pragmatic reasons that China cannot lead the world, the reality is simple. You cannot force people to like you. The Chinese government's mishandling, lies, cover-ups, politicizing the pandemic, they are the reason that your life was upturned. They lied in the beginning when they said that coronavirus was not human-to-human transmissible and convinced the world's governments that this was the case. And they continue to lie now, pointing their finger at every country that they don't like as being the origin of the coronavirus. It's a childish and a very gross look. That's the simple and hard truth. And people don't forget that. In fact, Pew Research shows that most countries around the world have never liked China less than they do now. The CCP's pride allowed the virus to come to your country, and the free world of the global citizens came together to create the vaccines for it. Let that be an analogy for how we should deal with the Chinese government going forward. You cannot be liked when you go around saying that anyone who tries to bully, oppress, or enslave China will crack their heads on the Great Wall of Steel made by 1.4 billion Chinese people. First of all, this maniacal display of authoritarianism is not palatable to most people around the world. But not only that, what kind of leader puts his people in front of him? Before anyone can criticize the CCP leadership, they have to crack their heads on innocent Chinese people? How cowardly. The Chinese government has proven far too untrustworthy to gain any real friendships. You see, they broke their promise with Hong Kong's one country, two systems. They break academic and business partnerships to steal intellectual property on the largest scale in history. It bullies and debt traps smaller and more vulnerable countries with the Belt and Road Initiative, pushing away future countries rather than enticing them. Threatening Taiwan, who is well loved and respected on a global scale, for not only being a bastion of democracy in the region, but also for being the world's largest chip supplier. Operating concentration camps in Western China for Uyghur Muslim minorities. You see, China is a Han Chinese ethno-state. The majority rules. And it treats its minority populations, like the Uyghur Muslims, with animosity and brutality. It's a domestic window into what life under Chinese leadership would look like internationally. And the list goes on. Ultimately, the reality is that China cannot be a better version of what has already failed. I'd like to quote the Polish philosopher Leszek Kolakowski. He said, "The rulers of totalitarian countries wish, of course, to be truthfully informed. But time and time again, they fall prey, inevitably, to their own lies and suffer unexpected defeats. Entangled in a trap of their own making, they attempt awkward compromises between their own need for truthful information and the quasi-automatic operations of a system that produces lies for everyone, including the producers. Instead of using economic growth and power to expand political freedoms in China, the Chinese government, the CCP, has acted like any other fascist or communist dictatorship, like Imperial Japan, like the Soviet Union, like Nazi Germany. And I'd like to ask you a question. How did those end up?